You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. It's been a while since we last had Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. She's been in Congress since 1993, and now there's a tough political battle for the redrawn 12th Congressional District, which now encompasses East Side and the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Congresswoman, thank you again for joining us.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, Zev Brenner. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. So how's the race coming along? Because this is a tough one because it pits you against Congressman Jerry Nadler. I assume you've been allies in the past up until this point in time.
Well, we were allies. We were friends, actually. And then when it was drawn this way, I called him. I said, let's work together to try to change the lines. And he said he really wasn't interested in that. I represent the 12th district now. The new district is called the 12th district. And then about a half hour later, he announced he was running against me. I thought that was a little rude not to give me some information that he was going to run against me. And I couldn't run any other place because that's the only place my base was. His campaign office, or rather his congressional office, was in the 10th, and the 10th was his old district. So he could have run in the 10th. But he decided to run in the 12th and told me that I should move aside. I should go run someplace else, that he was running here and he was going to beat me. And I'm not used to being pushed around like that. And I thought it was unfair since the 12th was my district. So I said, no, I'm going to run and let the people decide. So I decided to run, and we've barely spoken since then.
Have you had pressure from others in the Democratic Party to say step aside and make room for Congressman Adler?
No, not at all. They're aghast that he's running against me.
But you have, I'm sure you must have been surprised when Senator Chuck Schumer endorsed your opponent for the race.
Oh, it was very hurtful. It's the old boys network coming together and pushing the women out. They Times endorsed 3 men. So I'm the only woman in Manhattan. If I lose, there will be no woman in Manhattan in Congress.
So how is it going on the campaign trail? What are you hearing? Because there was one primary we had in June. Now there's another one that's taking place shortly in August. I would assume that a lot of voters are going to be on vacation. And the question is, how do you motivate a base to come out and support you, considering this time of year?
Well, it's very difficult. I'm out campaigning every day, and I tell you it's hot. But there are a lot of people here, and we're working hard. We did a very aggressive absentee ballot campaign. We have telephones, digital. We have campaigning with people on the street. We have mail. We have television. We have radio right now. So we're hitting on all cylinders.
So let's look at the Jewish vote, because according to statistics on the Upper East Side and Upper West Side of Manhattan, I think it's maybe 20 to 25% of the population is Jewish, and a lot of them do vote. They're very active in politics. So how are you reaching out to the Jewish community?
Well, I have worked very closely with Rabbi Lookstein and Rabbi Arthur Schneier and Mark Schneier, and I just got off the phone today with the Central Synagogue's a lovely, lovely woman who is the rabbi there. So I'm reaching out. I've been visiting synagogues on the east and west side, and I have visited the kiddushes on the Upper West Side and spoken in some synagogues, and just reached out. I've been endorsed by Elisha Wiesel, Elie Wiesel's son, who's helped me and made introductions. And one of my very close friends is Harley Lipman, and he was the Grand Marshal of the Israel Day Parade. I wrote a very important bill called the Holocaust Education Bill, the Never Again Education Act, and that is to combat anti-Semitism and creates a curriculum. It'll be in the Jewish Holocaust Museum in the federal one in Washington, D.C. And I wrote that with Janice Shorenstein, the former head of Hadassah. So she has been a very close friend. And
She was a former radio show. She did a show for us for a while she was. Yes, a show about women in Judaism, women in power in Judaism. Yes,
she has been very active, and together we worked very hard to pass that bill, and it passed overwhelmingly. And always the issues that are before us. There are two ways that I am very different from my opponent. And when it came to moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, my opponent, Jerry Nadler, voted no. So he voted against. I don't know why he did it. I voted yes. I firmly believe that a sovereign nation has the absolute right to determine where their capital is, and therefore the embassies should be there too. For example, our capital in Washington is Washington, D.C. All of the embassies are there. That's where the business takes place. So I don't understand why he voted against it. That was a big difference. And so I really do believe that you don't have to be Jewish to love the Jewish people and work for them and listen to their point of view. And that is what I've done. Another issue that we separated on was the Iran deal. And I studied that issue. I read every single piece of classified information. I met with every single constituent who wanted to speak to me about it. There were great emotions on both sides of the community that I represent, but I came down supporting really Israel because the Iran deal would not have ended Iran's nuclear program. So if you're going to have a deal to not have a nuclear program, then let's have one that doesn't have a nuclear program. And it didn't. After a certain point of time, it literally legalized a nuclear program, which was the exact opposite of what it was supposed to be. And the terms of the agreement was too short, the inspection regime was too limited, and the enforcement mechanism was too weak to have been effective. And what's more, Iran received billions in sanctions relief that it used to export terrorism around the globe. When we were negotiating it, I asked our negotiators to say that we should have them agree that they will not use this money to export terrorism. And they said, oh, no, we don't have to do it. They'll agree afterwards. I said, I want them to agree before. They wouldn't agree on that. And I think that I was right because the agreement, the day that was signed, the agreement allowed Iran to test long-range ballistic missiles, which is an offensive weapon system. It's not like the Iron Dome that intercepts missiles. This was an aggressive one, and so they literally rejoiced and said, let's kill Americans and let's kill Israelis. So I feel that I was right in that decision, and also it allowed Iran to start enriching uranium using increasingly sophisticated centrifuges early in the term of the deal. And I thought that Iran wanted sanctions relief desperately, and we could have negotiated a tougher deal.
Well, I agree.
It wasn't strong enough. That's it.
It wasn't strong enough. And how do you feel now that the Biden administration is desperately looking to make a deal with Iran? We're so opposed to what Russia's doing in Ukraine, and yet we're entrusting Russia to go ahead and help us make a deal with Iran, a rogue state that's into terrorism. Salman Rushdie was stabbed by somebody related to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Their fingerprints are all over terrorism around the world, and yet we want to engage them. We're going to trust them. I just don't understand what's going on. Perhaps you can shed some light as to your thinking on it.
Well, I would like a long and strong deal, and one that prevents the development of a nuclear weapon or a nuclear program, period. I'm encouraged by the conversation of President Biden. Biden has said that he would not agree to anything that unless it was clear that no nuclear program would come along. So the Biden administration has made that clear, and I can't comment on the deal until I see it and what exactly what the parameters are. They seem to keep changing daily, but I am encouraged by his strong statement that Iran shall not have a nuclear weapon. Period.
Well, it's been Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney in Congress since 1993. The newly restructured 12th Congressional District now pits her against Congressman Jerry Adler and others. Are you concerned about the third candidate, Mr. Patel, who I know ran against you a number of years ago? He seems to be surging. He's more progressive. People are saying, well, it's possible you and Congressman Adler will split the vote and get him in. Are you concerned at all about him?
I would say that you have to be concerned about everything when you have an election. Everything is serious and should be taken very seriously. But I would say that given what is happening, whether it's Ukraine or Iran or Israel or the United States, this is not a time for rookies. This is a time for really experienced legislators. Given what the Supreme Court has done, it has bulldozed women's rights into the ground. It has gutted our laws on gun safety. It has made it more difficult for us to enforce clean air and clean water, to name a few. So we need our most experienced people who know how to fight and fight hard, will never give up, who have the energy, the determination, the experience to get the job done. And I think it's very important that during this time when women's rights are really under attack, the Republican conservatives want to keep women down and back. And if we aren't strong, they already mentioned in their decision that they would be going after birth control, same-sex marriage, and other things. And I would say that this was the first time that a right was put in the Constitution that has been rolled back. And I find it abhorrent that I have two daughters. I have two young daughters, and they have fewer rights than I had. And I find that extremely troubling. And we have to address that. I just had a conference with the head of all the women's organizations, now Political Action Committee, Ms. Foundation, all of the wonderful programs where women, the Equal Rights Campaign, and we came out with a 12-point plan of what we need to do to have abortion in the states, statewide. And we have to watch very closely mifepristone. Mifepristone is a medicated abortion. And they used to say that you had to get it in person, which meant that we would not be able to mail it into the roughly 26 states that no longer have access to abortion, affecting roughly 33 million women. And my work, I wrote letters to the FDA over and over again. They changed their structure so that it does not have to be delivered in person. We can deliver it by mail, but we're going to have to watch that to make sure they don't try to curtail the ability to mail items. And that's a situation that we're looking at very closely. So I really do feel that you need women in Congress to fight for women and for families and children with these extreme, really these dangerous, extreme Supreme Court decisions.
I want to focus, going back to the Jewish vote, and of course, one of the emphasis is on Israel. And now with conflict with Hamas and Hezbollah and Lebanon poses a threat, Israel defends itself. And whenever Israel defends itself, it gets criticized. And thank God we have the Iron Dome defending Israel. But and I know you've been a strong supporter of Israel, but what can we do to shore up some more of that support? We see BDS movements growing all over. We're seeing all kinds of things that are attacking Israel, and we see the terrorist threat is looming very large. What can we do in the Congress regarding that?
Well, I have 3 statements to make in support of Israel's right to defend itself. And it's yes, yes, yes. Absolutely, Israel has a complete and total right to defend herself. And we are increasing funding for the Iron Dome. I've been to Israel and I have seen the Iron Dome. It wasn't during combat, but they put on a demonstration where they sent something up and the Iron Dome shot it down. So you could see how effective it is. And I've talked to school children, and when they go to school, they have bomb shelters right there that they can duck into in case there are attacks. So that has got to put tremendous pressure on young people. And I also always support the increase and acceptance of Israel in the Arab countries. One thing that President Trump did very, very well, I believe, was the Abraham Accords. I think that I couldn't believe it, that these countries that had been, quote, enemies were now going to be trading partners and negotiations and ways to improve the region. I think that was a huge step forward. I also think a very huge step forward was when President Biden met with the Prime Minister in Israel, and he left Israel and flew directly to Saudi Arabia. That was a first. It used to be we couldn't fly in those areas. And so I think that will help Israel to flourish and to grow stronger with the Abraham Accords. I do want to mention, Zev, that my committee that I chair, the Oversight Committee, the Oversight and Reform Committee, we had the responsibility to oversee the building of the embassy in Jerusalem. And at first, the State Department was telling us that it was going to take 6 to 10 years to build it, which is ridiculous. Ridiculous. So that was another bipartisan effort that we said, wake up. We're going to get this done in a year, and we can make it get done in a year, and we got it done.
Now, thank God, because I think just saying 6 or 7 years to build it was just a delay tactic where they're hoping that at the end of the day that it would just fall by the wayside. That's how I look at it.
That's how I look at it too.
Here's the toughest question of the interview so far, Congressman Maloney. You've been around in Congress since 1993. You've been going to a lot of different Jewish events. What's your favorite Jewish food when you go to these events?
Well, what I absolutely love is noodle kugel. Sweet. I love it. I think it's absolutely delicious.
I told you it was going to be the toughest question of the interview. Now, you mentioned before you're in touch with Jewish leaders, and since we announced you're going to be on the program, we spoke to Rabbi Milton Balkany of Brooklyn. He says he knows you. Have you reached out to even rabbis outside the community like Rabbi Balkany to be helpful in your efforts?
Yes, he's been helpful, and I represented him. I represented Brooklyn. That part of my district was cut out of my district. But also there was a lovely synagogue in Queens that I represented, and my offices were in Queens. I have an office for my congressional office, and I will share with you that it was defaced. They put swastikas and nasty sayings on my office in Queens. So anti-Semitism is alive and well, and it's something we'd have to take seriously. And I would say BDS is BS. And it's there's a very thin line between BDS and anti-Semitism. So that has to be watched very closely too. Maybe I should write another bill on that, on ways to.
We should, because anti-Semitism is growing, and one of the big concerns of Jewish constituents, not just on the Upper East and West sides, but throughout the New York region and beyond, is the growth of violent anti-Semitism. A lot of it doesn't get reported by the media. There was a young man, Yeshiva University student on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He was just punched in the face, and the man said, "I would kill you if I had a gun." He ended up with a lot of damage to him. And there's a lot of this going on. And what can we do to combat this hate scourge? It's just terrible.
Well, that's what my bill is about. I'm a former teacher, so I see the answer to many questions through education, the lens of education. Children are not born with hate in their hearts. It is taught to them. So we need to teach tolerance, understanding, acceptance, and to have, a group of people that, and every time you see any anti-Semitic act, I believe that we as a community must stand up and speak out against it. Must stand up and speak out against it. Very bad.
Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney is our guest. She's been in Congress since 1993. It's still the same district, but they changed the parameters. So the 12th Congressional District now encompasses the east side, which it originally did, and now the west side. She's pitted against Congressman Adler and others in a very, very tough race. Just turn to some domestic issues. Crime. What could be done on a congressional level to combat crimes in big cities such as New York?
Well, I represent the federal government, so they obviously need to make different adjustments on the state level and the city level. But on the federal level, I have gun safety bills that I'm introducing and that I have introduced to get these illegal guns off the street and these dangerous guns off the street.
And we have to get the dangerous criminals off the street too.
And I have a bill in on mental health. You'd be surprised how many of these criminals are literally mentally ill. And I researched it after Michelle Go was pushed in front of a train, and the Mr. Simon who pushed her had gone to doctors and said he was going to push a woman in front of a train if they didn't give her a bed. There were no beds for him. So I researched it. There's very little there for mentally ill people. So I researched it and found there was a law that passed in 1962 that capped the amount of Medicaid money coming into our city. So it said it had to be just 16 beds or less. And I took that bill and lifted the cap so that our hospitals and other larger facilities could have a bit more beds to treat mentally ill. Those are two ways that I am working to confront it. But in terms of the hate crimes, I've been thinking about another bill, and that is to double the penalty for hate crimes. Make it just really a horrendous punishment for anybody who participates in any type of hate crime.
In a few moments that we have left, what's the brouhaha about your saying, you're either on the record or off the record, that President Joe Biden shouldn't run again?
I never said that. I said, if he runs, I will support him 110%. I think he's doing an incredible job. We just passed the Inflation Reduction Bill, which is going to help our economy pay down the deficit. And first of all, it was silly of me to conjecture on his decision to run. And there should be no question that I support him. I've supported him before. I support him in the future. Personally, I think it's election time and a lot of people are cooking up mischief and, making things happen and attacking me. I would like to say to your listeners, any attack you hear against me, call me personally, and I will set the story straight. But I am a candidate. I am competitive. I do work hard, and I am going to be attacked by my opponents. I do want to say that I'm concentrating very much on this upcoming Democratic primary on August 23rd, and early voting has already started. So we are in the middle of early voting now. It's a very hard time to remember to vote because most families take their vacations last 2 weeks of August, and that's when the vote is. I don't know why they couldn't have waited.
Who came up with this whole idea? I'm opposed to two primaries. I think it's really outrageous.
I agree. And I just think that it's ridiculous. But before we get to the 2024 politics, we have to get through the 2022 politics first. So that's what we're concentrating on and working on. And I really would like to appeal to your listeners to vote for me on August 23rd. And where does it say that you have to be Jewish to stand up for Jews? I do want to mention that I authored 4 important bills that help the Jewish people here in America. And I'd like to tell you one. One is the Holocaust education bill. It's funded at $10 million every 5 years. And it creates the curriculum. Anybody can come to the Jewish Museum and get appropriate curriculum and materials to teach. And so that is an important one. It was signed into law by President Trump. And another one, the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, was signed into law by President Carter. Not Carter, but Clinton. And when you have a presidential bill signing, it's reserved for bills that are considered extremely important. So both of those bills, that opened up the files so you could see and learn from what happened. And then I authored a bill that gave reparations, $60 million to the French Jews that were put on the carts and shipped by the rail trade to Auschwitz. And then my last bill, I'm very proud of it, was it said we could give no aid to any country that participated, and we couldn't sell any weapons to any country that participated in the economic boycott of Israel. So those were four bills that I took the initiative to write and pass. So I really have enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed talking to you, Zev. I want to do it again, but I'm late to a meeting and I've got to go, and I don't like being late. So
we appreciate you being here. Well, we look forward to having you back again. You have raised some very important issues, and I have to tell people they have to vote. We got to do something about this electoral process, get more people involved in voting, because the system right now, I think, is lousy, especially with the way it's set up with the primary system. And we got to engage more people, not less people. But Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, thank you for joining us.
Well, can you give me a telephone number so I can contact you? Okay.
Just a moment.
Thanks for listening.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com. Past shows, you can find us